One day, your house doesn't go quiet. It stays quiet, and you realize it's not going to change. You wake up to the same light pushing through the curtains, the same kettle humming on the stove, the same hallway stretching out in front of you. But something feels off in a way that's hard to explain, because nothing has changed. And yet everything has. The rooms are still there, the table, the chairs, the small marks on the walls that have been there for years, the sound of the wind brushing past. The windows, but the house holds the quiet differently now, like it's no longer waiting for anything to interrupt it. You stand there for a moment longer than usual, listening, not for a sound exactly, but for the possibility of one. And when it doesn't come, that's when it begins to settle in. This isn't a quiet morning. This is what the house sounds like now. And it's strange how it happens, because it's not sudden. It doesn't arrive all at once. It builds slowly.
I can't keep this
pieces.
inside any longer.
A door that doesn't open anymore. A voice you don't hear in the next room. Footsteps that used to pass by without you noticing now replaced by something still and unmoving. You tell yourself it's normal, that houses get quieter, that life changes, that people move on. But there's a moment, usually a small one, when it lands differently, when you walk into a room expecting something without realizing it, and there's nothing there to meet you. That's when it shifts, because the silence isn't just in the house, it's in what used to happen inside it. I remember sitting at the kitchen table one afternoon, the light coming in low through the window, hitting the same spot it always did, and I reached for a second cup without thinking, just reached, and then stopped halfway, because there was no one left to take it. Not that day, not any day after. And that's the kind of moment that doesn't feel big, but it stays with you, because it shows you something you weren't ready to see. The house didn't just lose its sound. It lost the way it used to hold you. You start to notice how much of your life happened between those small sounds. The conversations from another room, the quiet movements that told you someone else was there, the sense that the house wasn't just a place you lived in, but a place that responded to you. And without that, something begins to feel wider, too wide. You walk from one end of the house to the other, and it feels longer than it used to, not because it changed, but because there's nothing breaking it up anymore. No voices, no interruptions, no reason to stop halfway and say something. You just keep walking, and the quiet follows you. That's when the thought starts to take shape, not all at once, just slowly, in the background. If the house is quiet now, what part of you has gone quiet with it? You try to ignore it at first, keep the same routines, make the same coffee, sit in the same chair, turn on the radio even when you're not listening, as if that might fill something, but it doesn't quite reach the same places, because the silence isn't about sound, it's about absence. It's about the things that used to happen here that no longer do. And more than that, it's about the version of you that only existed while they were happening. You start to feel it in the smallest ways. You say something out loud, maybe just to yourself, and it feels thinner, like it no longer carries the same weight. You hear your own voice in the room, and for a moment, it doesn't feel like it belongs there in the same way, because before, it wasn't just your voice, it was part of something shared. It was heard, answered, shaped by someone else, and now it just fades into the quiet. That's where the discomfort begins to grow, not sharply, not all at once, just enough that you can't quite ignore it anymore. The realization that the house didn't just go quiet, it stopped reflecting you back to yourself. And without that reflection, something inside you starts to loosen. You sit there in the late afternoon, the light stretching across the floor, the kind of slow, steady light that doesn't rush anything, and you notice how still everything is. No one moving in the next room, no one calling out, no small sounds that used to tell you the house was alive in a way you didn't have to think about. And in that stillness, a question settles in, one that doesn't need words to be clear. If no one is here to share this space with you, who are you inside it now? And after a while,
I can't keep this inside any
the quiet
longer.
doesn't feel like something that happened to the house. It feels like something that's happening to you. You move through the same rooms, the same narrow hallway, the same worn kitchen floor that still creaks in the same places. But the way you move through them is different now, slower in a way that isn't about age, more like there's nothing pulling you forward anymore. You open a door and pause, not because you forgot why you came in, but because there's no one on the other side of it, no one to react, no one to respond. And without that, the moment feels unfinished. That's when the quiet begins to stretch, not just across the house, but across your day. You make your coffee and sit down, and there's no conversation waiting to begin, no voice that breaks into your thoughts, no small interruption that reminds you you're not alone in the space. And it's in those small, ordinary moments that the feeling starts to deepen, because the house used to shape you. Without you noticing, the way you spoke, the way you moved, the way you existed inside it, all of it adjusted itself around the presence of someone else. And now, without that presence, there's nothing shaping you in the same way. You find yourself standing in the middle of a room, not doing anything, just standing there longer than you should, because there's no next moment waiting for you. And that's the part that unsettles you, not the silence itself, but what the silence removes, the sense that you were part of something that moved, something that responded, something that confirmed you were there. I remember one night, late, the kind of night where the house holds onto the dark a little longer, and I heard a sound from the back room, just a small sound, and for a second, I turned, ready to say something, ready to respond the way I always had, and then it stopped, and I stood there, still, realizing there was no one there, not just in that moment, but in any moment after it. And that's when it settles deeper, because you don't just lose the people, you lose the way you existed with them. You lose the version of yourself that only appeared when they were around, the one who spoke a certain way, the one who moved through the house without thinking, the one who never had to question whether they belonged in that space. And without that version, something becomes harder to recognize. You start to feel it in the quietest ways. You say something out loud, and it feels like it disappears too quickly. You laugh at something, and it stops almost immediately, because there's no one there to carry it further. You hear your own footsteps, and they sound louder than they should, like they're the only thing left confirming you're still there. And that's when the fear begins to take shape, not sharp, not overwhelming, just steady. The thought that maybe the house isn't the only thing that's gone quiet, that maybe parts of you have gone quiet too, parts that only existed because someone else was there to hear them, to answer them, to recognize them without needing you to explain. You sit there, in the same chair, the same light falling across the room, the same open space stretching out around you, and you realize something you didn't expect. The house isn't empty. It's just no longer holding the version of you that used to live inside it. And without that, you begin to feel less certain, not gone, not broken, just less defined, like something that used to be. Clear now sits slightly out of reach, and you try, sometimes, to bring it back. You speak more.
I can't keep this inside any
longer. You turn on the
longer.
radio. You let noise fill the space, but it doesn't change the feeling underneath it, because the quiet isn't about sound. It's about the absence of being known in the way you once were. And that's the turn that stays with you. Not that the house is silent, but that without the people who filled it, you're no longer entirely sure who you are inside it anymore. And after enough days pass like that, something else begins to change, something even quieter than the silence itself. And that's when you realize it's no longer just the house that has become still. It's the way you exist inside it. You wake up, move through the same rooms, make the same coffee, sit in the same chair by the window or out on the veranda where the sky stretches endlessly over the yard. But there's no sense of being expected anywhere anymore, no small pull from another room, no voice that shapes your next moment. And without that, time starts to feel different, not slower exactly, just less defined. Like the day isn't made up of shared moments anymore, just one long stretch of quiet that you move through on your own. And that's when the thought comes back, not as a question this time, but as something you can feel without needing to say it. If no one is here to share this space with you, what part of you is still being lived? You try not to think about it directly, because when you do, it feels too open, too exposed, like standing in the middle of that wide yard with nothing around you to break the space, nothing to hold your place in it. So instead, you keep moving. You wash the cup, you adjust the chair, you look out at the same stretch of sky as the light shifts from afternoon into evening, the colors flattening into that dull, quiet blue that seems to go on forever. But even in those small routines, you start to notice something unsettling. There's no one left who would. Notice if you stopped, not in a dramatic way, not suddenly, just gradually, quietly. No one who would hear the absence of your footsteps in the next room. No one who would pause and think something's different today. And that thought doesn't hit all at once. It settles slowly, like everything else has. You realize that the house used to hold more than just your presence. It held the way you were seen, the way your movements mattered to someone else, even in the smallest ways, the way your voice filled the space not just with sound, but with meaning. And now, without that, the house doesn't respond to you anymore. It doesn't change when you speak. It doesn't shift when you move. It just stays the same. And that's when the fear becomes clearer, not loud, not overwhelming, just steady and hard to shake. The sense that you're still here, but less anchored than you used to be, that without someone else inside this space, The version of you that once lived here has nowhere to fully exist anymore. You feel it in the smallest details, the way your voice sounds when you say something out loud and it fades too quickly, the way your footsteps echo slightly more than they should, the way you pause in a doorway expecting something and there's nothing waiting on the other side, and slowly, without meaning to, you begin to stop expecting it. You stop turning your head when you hear a sound. You stop thinking about what you would say next. You stop preparing for a conversation that isn't coming. And that's the part that changes everything. Not that the house is quiet, but that you no longer expect it not to be.
I can't keep this inside any longer.
The evening settles in, the air cooling slightly, the last light stretching thin across the yard before it disappears. And for a moment you notice how complete the silence feels. Not empty, not broken, just complete. And in that completeness, something else becomes clear. The house didn't take anything from you. It simply stopped giving you back the parts of yourself that used to live here with someone else. And what's left now isn't the same person who once filled these rooms without thinking. It's something quieter, something less defined, something that exists without being reflected, without being confirmed, without being held in place by anyone else. And maybe that's the part that's hardest to sit with, not the silence itself, but the realization that without the people who once filled this house, there's no one left who can tell you, in the way they once did, that you're still the same person who used to live here, and you sit there a little longer, in that same chair, in that same fading light, not trying to answer it anymore, not trying to bring anything back, just noticing what's still here. And for the first time, it doesn't feel like something that needs to be fixed. It just feels like this. And after a while, even that feeling begins to settle into something quieter, not because it's been resolved, but because there's nothing left to push against it anymore, and you find yourself sitting in that same place, the same chair, the house holding its stillness the way it does now, and you realize you haven't been waiting for anything at all, not for a sound, not for a voice, not for the next moment to begin. The day just moves, slowly, evenly, without asking anything from you, and for a long time that felt wrong, like something was missing that should still be there. But now it feels different, not better, not worse, just different. You notice how the house no longer surprises you, no unexpected footsteps, no voices carrying through the walls, no doors opening or closing without you knowing why. And at first that kind of stillness felt like something you had to endure, something you had to get used to. But now it's simply what the house is, and more than that, it's what you are inside it, because the longer you sit with it, the clearer it becomes that the silence didn't just change the house, it changed the way you understand yourself. You're no longer moving in response to someone else. You're no longer speaking into a space that answers back. You're no longer shaping yourself around the presence of another person. And without that, something fundamental shifts, not in a dramatic way, not in a way that announces itself, just quietly, steadily, until you begin to feel it as something natural. You stand in the kitchen, doing something simple, something you've done for years, and for a moment it feels unfamiliar, not the action itself, but the person doing it, because that person used to exist in relation to someone else, in response to someone else, and now there's no one there to complete that, and that's where the final turn begins to take shape, not as a question anymore, not as something you're trying to understand, but as something you can feel without needing to name it, that the house didn't become quiet all at once, and you didn't become this version of yourself all at once either. It happened together, as the voices faded, as the movements disappeared, as the small, shared moments stopped happening. Something in you
I can't keep
shifted
this
with
inside
it,
any longer.
something that no longer needed to be confirmed by someone else to exist. And that's a strange place to arrive at, because for most of your life, you didn't exist on your own in that way. You existed in the way you were seen, in the way you were heard, in the way someone else knew you without needing you to explain yourself. And now, sitting here, in this same house that no longer carries those things, you're left with something that feels lighter, but also less certain, not because you're missing something, but because there's nothing left to define you in the way you once expected. And you might think that would feel empty, that it would feel like something has been taken away, but it doesn't quite feel like that. It feels more like something has stopped holding you in place. The house no longer tells you who you are by the way it responds to you. The rooms no longer reflect you back in the way they once did. The silence doesn't shape you. It just leaves you as you are. And that's the part that settles in the deepest, not the loss of sound, not the absence of people, but the quiet realization that without all of that, you're still here, not in the same way, not as clearly defined, not held together by the same things that once made you feel certain of who you were, but not gone either, just here, in a house that no longer echoes with anything but the present moment, with nothing left to interrupt it, nothing left to shape it, nothing left to tell you who you're supposed to be inside it, and you sit there, in that same fading light, the house holding its quiet around you, and for a moment, you don't try to fill it, you don't try to speak into it, you don't try to bring anything back, you just notice what remains, not everything, not the same as before, but enough to know that even in the silence, even in a house that no longer carries the life it once did, something is still here, and it doesn't need to be heard to exist.